I saw this post in r/experience devs and immediately realized that I had to talk about it. I didn't have a chance to last week, but I do now. So let's sit down and read The Chaos of React in Medium to Large Web Apps. Has anyone experienced it differently? This is a post in r/experience devs, and I obviously have a lot of thoughts. I've been working with React codebases exclusively since 2016, and the quality of the code I've inherited was always atrocious when dealing with medium to large apps. If you're just making a to-do list, sure, it's all fun and games, but I've yet to see a real commercial or enterprise-grade React app that doesn't become a disorganized mess. There has not been a single exception. I kid you not, I worked on a few Angular projects back in the day that were easier to manage as they grew compared to most React ones, as many things other frameworks handle for you under the hood or make straightforward to handle manually will require boilerplate in React. And because the React model is open and not standardized, most developers won't do it as the React team intended compared to what the docs suggest. I already have opinions. Not only do I have opinions, I also have a sponsor, so let's hear from them really quick.
Hey man, I need you to make a new dashboard for me. I need to know every time a user searches for oranges. I also need to be able to upload pictures of dogs in order to tag them to the people based on the oranges they searched for, so I have a UI where I can see this all. And it has to update live. I can't have this lagging at all. I need to know immediately which oranges are being searched for. This is crucial, man. We gotta get this right. When do you think you can have done? It's already done? What do you mean? It would have taken the other dev weeks. Your last dev wasn't using convex. What's convex? Convex is the only decision you have to make about your backend. They built a new way to think about full stack state, and it's awesome. You write the code in your project, and they generate both the data model and the API for it. You can then call your functions directly in your front end. It even auto-updates when changes happen. Oh, and if you're making big code changes on your end, you don't have to worry about making mistakes because it's fully type safe, just like TRPC. Thank you, Convex, for sponsoring today's video.
As a rough estimate, I've probably worked with 50 different engineers, mostly senior, doing React code across 6 to 7 companies. I would estimate that at most, 5 to 10 of them truly knew how React worked and how to use it properly. Over time, like the last 2 to 3 years, it began to dawn on me that the problem might be React itself and not the devs. The other 40 to 45 engineers who didn't have much idea of what they were doing included ex-PayPal and ex-Twitter engineers. Many of these engineers were smart in other areas of computer science and software engineering, but somehow that knowledge didn't translate to React. Okay. I like that they're asking this question here of, has anyone here actually worked with senior devs who truly understood React? I'm not talking about knowing its internals and how the library's code base is written necessarily, just how about using the library as the library authors intended. There's a couple layers here I want to go into. The first one, because it's a really quick own, is implying that ex-PayPal and ex-Twitter means the engineers are good. Every company has hired shit engineers, and if they're not at PayPal or Twitter anymore, either they quit because they got a better opportunity or they quit because they couldn't do well at the company. Humanoid just said there's potentially a really good reason why they're ex-engineers from these places. The fact that they used to work there means effectively nothing. So I don't like this appeal specifically. And also, engineers that were smart in other areas of CS and software engineering somehow fail to translate that knowledge to React. How much of this failure is not knowing React well versus not knowing how to structure a large code base well? Because most people who are experts in CS don't know jack shit about how to organize a code base. And I've seen this a lot. I've worked with hundreds of CS grads, and the worst programmer I ever came across, as far as the readability of their code, had a master's degree in CS from Stanford. The reply that this will haunt me until I stop talking about code forever. It could be that they're working at a higher level than you understand. Not being snarky, but the elite schools are significantly advanced. I don't mean to say the author here is doing the same thing, but the implication is similar, where somebody being experienced in computer science and even being experienced in software engineering doesn't mean they know how to scale a code base. And a lot of the things that we're talking about here are just about the problems inherent to scaling a code base over time. So those are the first 2 things I wanted to jump on, but there's more in here as well. I'll start with some sympathizing. The React model being open absolutely means that chaos can occur. You can have chaos in basically any solution, but the potential for chaos in React is a good bit higher because it doesn't prescribe solutions to things. This contradicts another point that's being made in here, which is that most developers won't do it as the React team intended. The React team doesn't have that strong of intentions on how to do things. Even at Meta, there's a lot of different ways they use React. It's been largely decided by the React core team that the library MobX is not very React-y, and they highly recommend against using MobX, especially if you want to use things like the React compiler, because the level of abstraction that MobX works at can't be compiled out anywhere near as well. Despite that, the creator of MobX actually works at Facebook. So the person who made this library that adamantly disagrees with the rules of React and the way the React team thinks things should be done, they still work at Meta. They still use React every day in ways that the core team does not agree with. They're doing all sorts of crazy shit. Michael Westray's a legend. But this is part of what makes React so powerful. It's as misusable as a language is. Like, imagine if we rewrote this post to be about Go. The chaos of Go in medium to large apps. Has anyone experienced it differently? I've been working with Go code bases exclusively since 2016, and the quality of the code I've inherited has always been atrocious when dealing with medium to large apps. You can write this about a language the same way. And is it fair to say that React is more like a language than a framework? Yeah, people are going to be upset that I'm saying that, but it's kind of the design goal of React, is to make it behave more like a language so that we can build our expectations around it over time. And that's part of the magic of React, is the amount of complexity can be expanded or collapsed based on your specific needs, which is really, really cool. There's one more piece I want to touch on here, though, that I think is really important. The code I've inherited, especially when you combine that with the fact that since 2016, they've worked across 6 to 7 companies. My assumption here, that might be corrected as I scroll further, is that this developer spent a lot of time working as almost like a contractor role, coming in to fix fucked up code bases. That is a really underappreciated role. And the people who do that work are incredibly talented and hardworking. It's nuts to take an old code base from a bunch of burnt out engineers that's falling apart and then come in as a third party to fix it. That sucks. And I have massive respect for this person for going through that. And I'm certain that they have a lot of experience that I can't possibly relate to. That all said, the quality of code they are experiencing is inherently lower than the average large code base, because the average large code base isn't calling in third-party help to come in and fix it. Another person I saw this problem with a lot was Alex Russell. Alex Russell, for those who don't know, his handle is slightly late. He was with a person who pushed really hard to have things like a Blink added to the browser standards, but specifically was the biggest pusher of progressive web apps and web components. He hates React. Him and I had a debate way back. I think it would have been like end of 2022, if I recall, at the Dolby office, specifically talking about how much damage has React done. He has concluded that React is the thing destroying the internet, and all of the stuff that it's doing is why the web is getting so slow. One of my favorite examples from him was when a COVID site produced by the LA city county government came out to track COVID spread. And the site was super slow and it was using React. So he went on Twitter blasting them, saying, look, this is why React is so bad. It's resulting in all of these terrible code bases existing. Look at how slow the site is. Imagine how fast it would be if they didn't use React. Ken Wheeler profiled it. Turned out it was downloading a 5 megabyte JSON file and parsing it on client. That's why it was slow. Had nothing to do with React at all. But since Alex's job is helping teams, both when he was at Google and now that he's at Microsoft, who are having specific problems with their code bases being really slow and their applications being shit, since it's his job to help them, he disproportionately sees really rough code bases. If it's your job to unfuck things, everything starts to look a little more fucked in your life. If you're surrounding yourself with the worst possible code bases, because that's how you make money, because you fix the bad code bases for a living, you're going to have massive biases when you talk about these things. And I find that these people, despite having such useful insights and knowledge, often have a perspective like this one, where they feel like everything sucks. And it must be the technology. Because if you look at 6 shit apps, or if you are working in 7 shitty code bases across 8 years, and all 7 use React, that seems like React's the problem. But if there's also good React code bases too, you're not seeing those because it's not your job to work in a good code base. It's your job to unfuck a bad one. So if that is what this person's job is, that's a really important bias to understand, because they're coming in to unfuck things. And chances are the people who knew how these things worked, to touch on another point he made here, the question at the bottom, have we ever worked with senior devs that truly understand React? Yes. If the code base gets bad enough, they don't have the ability to fix it, they quit and go somewhere else instead. There are more good React code bases that need help than there are good React engineers. So the ones who are good enough at these things can go find those code bases in those companies and work there. So these are all the massive biases I want to make sure that we account for as we read and go through this, because I've worked in a lot of big React code bases too. Nowhere near as many as this person has, but enough to know that some were really good and some weren't. And that largely depended on the leadership of the team and the way they wanted to architect things. I will say on the Angular point, they specified they worked on Angular JS projects. I would love to see how they would feel on a code base that started on Angular JS and then upgraded to Angular 2 and had to rewrite everything, but then refused to rewrite a bunch of things. I'd be really curious to see how they would feel about one of those code bases, because those are some of the worst nightmares I've seen in my life. Like, it's bad. To avoid being too vague, I'll give a non-exhaustive list of the biggest problems I've seen, currently see, and probably will continue to see in the future. Wrong usage of hooks everywhere. Yep, I'll take the L here. Hooks made it so much easier to interface with, add, and use state to your components that people just started throwing them everywhere. It's such a powerful primitive that it has resulted in people doing really, really dumb things. It's kind of nuts. Use effect. Use effect deserves a rant even longer than this one. Yeah, most people use effect wrong. As he pointed out here, the React docs have a whole section. You might not need an effect because you might not. How do we remove unnecessary effects? Well, you don't need effects to transform data for rendering. Very important piece. There's a lot of things. I've seen people use effects for so many dumb things. Like this is a really common one. You want to have a full name variable. So you get first name and last name from these other things. And then you set full name to be first name plus empty string plus last name. And you do this to get this other state variable you want up to date. You could also just do const full name equals first name plus last name right here and not define another state variable. I find that this pattern in particular comes from people who are coming from other solutions or old class-based React stuff that assume every variable that's dynamic needs to be put inside of a hook, like a use state. This is a very specific type of brain rot that I've seen a lot of the time. And I think this has to be stomped out via code review. I think one of the important things in React is having a good enough engineer to do code reviews to slowly get these pieces of knowledge distributed across the team. This is the case for almost any technology, but since React itself is so open, you need to have people who have strong enough opinions and enough control over the code base to enforce these types of things over time. Who taught me that is a great question. I learned React because we were moving Twitch from Ember to React. We had a bunch of engineers that were really excited about React, and I was hating working on backend at the time because I just moved to a Go team and I was not enjoying working in Go. Some of those engineers saw how excited I was about React stuff and pulled me under their wing, gave me really thorough code reviews, and asked me questions like, why did you think that was the right decision to make here? I would link them docs. They would go change the docs to make it easier for the next person. And that culture, that involvement helped me level up, not just as a React engineer, but as a quality engineer overall, especially in front end. But React provides a lot of opportunities for us to have these conversations and make these types of good decisions because React code is super code reviewable, which is a thing that we don't talk about enough, especially when we think about things like jQuery, where it's really hard to know what files are affected by a change that you made. So if you make a change that targets a random element based on its ID and then updates it, where is that element? Where is it being created? That control flow means that code reviews for any of these other solutions, especially things like Angular and jQuery, where this is all split across many files, the reviewing process is significantly worse. And actually being able to find mistakes, much less give useful feedback to the developers building with those things, is way harder. I was around when Twitch investigated Elm, but I wasn't deep enough on the front end side to seriously explore it. But the point I'm trying to make here is that code review process is so essential for leveling up your engineers and having a good code base. And one of the things React does really well with the way it isolates co-location and lets you really have files and components that describe exactly what they do, makes it way easier to identify these things in code review. The failures are more likely to happen due to the open model, but the structure makes it easier to catch due to that same model. And that's the thing I don't think is being acknowledged here because we're already past that point in this author's perspective. Since they're fixing fucked code bases, the bad code had to already go through review and merge and deploy. So the code review process has failed. And if the code review process has failed, I don't know how much a framework change is going to help. It might lower, it might raise your floor a little bit, but your ceiling is going to be shit still. And your ability to level up engineers is going to be shit as well. I will say, if you're adopting React at a decent sized company, that as he said, you have like 50 different engineers working on a given code base. If you're working at a company like that and you're adopting React, please have at least one React expert making a lot of the decisions around that. They can trickle the knowledge down to other people over time. But if you don't have some React experts leading these decisions for a whole team, you're kind of fucked. If there is no expertise on a given framework and you want to build a tool with that framework, find something that somebody has expertise in or hire an expert. If you're betting lots of people and lots of time and money onto a tool that you didn't make, please make sure someone understands it. I think that's another point that I'm going to really emphasize throughout this. It's not so much that React results in bad engineering, but React has become the default thing engineers pick. Really good engineers will look at different options, understand them, make a decision. Really bad engineers use whatever they're told to use on Twitter or on YouTube or wherever else. Sorry for my contributions there. The average bad engineer probably picked React. It sucks to think of it that way as a huge React advocate. But when something becomes that universal and that popular, it gets used by more people. And at a certain point, the average person joining into the React hype cycle is not a good engineer anymore, because all the good engineers have already either started using React or made their decision on something else. So all of these bad engineers are the ones still making decisions that are kind of clueless and don't know about these things. So if there is a bad code base that was built in the last 5 years, it's disproportionately likely to be written in React, because code bases that have no oversight are also disproportionately likely to be written in React. So I don't think of this so much as React equals bad code base, but I would absolutely agree bad code base probably equals React, because React has allowed for so many more developers to build so many more things and so many people reach for it, not understanding it. That all checks out. I'm tangenting too far. Let's go back to these hooks, because I agree use effect stuff is way more confusing than it should be. And most people shouldn't be writing use effects almost ever. The callback pass to use effect is usually unnamed and has no comments, and you can have several effects doing completely unrelated things. Additionally, event listeners and the like are often not cleaned up, and few people seem to know about the use effect return value for unmounting or synchronizing with a previous render. I'm just going to poll chat because I want to see how bad this is. Did you know use effect return funcs run on unmount? Yes, no, IDK, I don't write React. I'm curious how many of y'all do and don't know that. Yeah, use callback's a weird one to describe. It's meant to be a memoization thing. I really, really wish use event, I think it was, merged. Okay. This is why I'm starting to get skeptical of this thing on Reddit. Because when we look at the poll here, yes, we're a bunch of nerds. This is not the average developer here. But that ratio, where only 8% of people who use React, of this, like a 62 to 8 ratio here, is kind of nuts. Like that's pretty nuts. Sure, Vue has on mounted or on unmounted, but what if I want that functionality in a custom hook that you're applying? Now you have to apply that to a component, and you have to embed your hook in like 15 places in your component. It sucks. There's a reason Vue is moving towards this model, because it's better. The cool thing about hooks is it lets you abstract your state the same way you would abstract components, and then you can hook that state machine into a component directly. So yeah, the core point I'm trying to make here is that use effect is hard, but even decent developers are going to understand that you can use effect to clean things up, and that you can use the use effect return value for unmounting or synchronizing with a previous render. If you have a bunch of developers that don't write React, don't learn the tool they're using, and are just copy pasting code because it seems to work, yeah, they suck. But to go to the earlier question of like, is React the problem or is it the engineers? These engineers are smart with computer science stuff. Have they learned other frameworks? What other tools do they like? The average React dev has never written in another framework before. So it's not fair to say that their incompetence comes from React so much as their incompetence comes from being incompetent. And I'm positive that this person's experience is real. I am almost certain that they're being truthful, that in their experience, few people seem to know about the use effect return values. But that's because it's their job to unfuck these terrible code bases and help fix these poorly aligned teams. I'll be straight up. If you're this clueless, like if your company doesn't have any experts in any frameworks, just go use Laravel. Just go use it. It's fine. Laravel will coddle you and carry you gently to something that mostly works and costs too much money on the server side. And that's fine. That's totally fine. If you don't know how to use the tool, don't use the fucking tool. Anyways, let's see what other state he has issues with and what other hooks, because I'm very curious. Use state. Developers often add things to the state when they should be using variables derived from other actual state, or they create multiple different states for related data that should be an object when co-locating data. There's also state duplication when it's passed downstream as props, with some developers thinking the state almost like a variable. Yep. As I said, massive incompetence. If they're coming from something else, like, I don't know, classes and shit OO stuff, when you pass values down, you can't just use the value. You have to do a bunch of shit to it. This is actually one of the things where React is simpler, but people are applying the wrong mental model. So I would say that this point here is actually an argument in favor of React, because this is simpler in React. They're making it more complex than it should be when they add these additional layers that they don't need, because they're assuming they need these layers because they come from other technologies that are more complex and do actually need these layers. But I would imagine these devs would have a similar issue moving to something like Svelte or Solid, because they're thinking of these things in a fundamentally wrong way. But they're adding more things than they need. If more developers approach things by writing the most minimal possible solution, seeing if it works or not, and if it doesn't, making changes from there, awesome. A+. I love that. But if you're just copy pasting a bunch of things, it falls apart really quickly. Use memo and use callback. Actually, one more thing on this though. I've never had an autocomplete Copilot type thing do this wrong. I've never had, in my memory at least, either Super Maven, which is what I use and I'm invested in, or Copilot, which I don't use, but I'm also invested in because I'm a Microsoft investor. I've never had either of those tools generate an unnecessary use state or use effect in memory, because a very basic level of competence suggests that this example here, first name, then last name. You know what? Let's go try this. Let's see what happens if I go to VS Code, I open up some random test component.tsx. We'll paste this in. I'll import that. Define full name. Look at that. Look at that. Any even vaguely competent autocomplete knows to do that and not to do this. So if really basic to the point of being bad autocomplete AI is that much better than your team, I think that says more about the team. Is Theo code interviewing Copilot? Effectively, yes. Like, why did Copilot do this right first try if it's that hard? Because it's not a problem with the way the framework works. It's a problem with the way these people's brains work. And again, because people don't choose to use React, I saw a bunch of this when I had to onboard a bunch of C# engineers onto a React code base. And those C# engineers wrote a lot of bullshit like this. And I would say over time, when I gave them more code reviews and I had another person who really understood these things doing even more code reviews for that team, about half the engineers picked up on the patterns and got way better at these things. I know a few that have fully moved off of C# and the Unity stuff they used to work on to go all in on React because they liked it so much. But a few didn't. A few just could not comprehend the idea that state flowed top to bottom. They expected everything to have all of these crazy behaviors going on behind the scenes, these weird acyclical graphs and shit that they expect with all their crazy object bullshit. The cool thing about React is if you write it correctly, you can just read the file top to bottom. There are not many frameworks that you could do that with to this day. And the ones that try, like Vue tried with the composition API, Vue realized that they had this problem where everything was getting mixed into each other. With Options API, which is the way people used to like writing Vue, and now they hate it, supposedly. I think composition is way better, but to each their own. You had to intermix all of these different concerns every couple lines. If we were to move to the old React model, where we had, you know what, we'll do it. I'm going to go to Copilot, or ChatGPT. Rewrite this React component in class components. Or I'll do as a class component. I'll make a new file. Cool. So that's fun. I'm gonna be mad about any. I guess we'll just kill the super because we don't have any props. Who cares? Is that really that mad about that? It has to contain a super call. Are you kidding? God, I hate classes so much. So you might notice some things here. Beyond the red squigglies that I've been desperately trying to clean up, this is so much worse. The fact that you have to start with the constructor, which is a component concern. The idea of a constructor doesn't matter to the first name or the last name. The idea of a constructor only matters to this component. And we have the handle first name change and handle last name change as separate functions we had to define ourselves in here that do specific things that we called out ourselves, because the ability to change the first name isn't a concern of the first name, it's a concern of the component. This is why class components sucked. And it kind of reads top to bottom, but not really. Because first we have to construct the component. We have no idea what first name and last name are. We are binding the first name and last name changes before we've even read the definitions for them. And then we have a separate render function that is unrelated to everything else, where we have first name and last name is this.state. Full name is first name, last name, split like this still. And then we do what we want to with it. But we have to call these onChange this dot values that are entirely type unsafe because, again, all of these behaviors are really deeply tied to the component. This is why hooks are magical. Let's say we want to reuse this somewhere else. We'll make a custom hook. Function use name. And this guy will have first name and last name. Let's say you don't even want to use the first name though. You just want the full name. Okay, actually it looks like we need that for this input here. Now we can return all of these things. First name, full name, set first and set last. Now this behavior And all of the things it does are defined in one place. And I can do that. And now I can reuse this state anywhere else. I can separate these things how I do or don't want to. And let's say we want to trigger an analytics call whenever your name changes. We could have a use effect in here that does that. So fire an analytics event whenever the full name changes. Cool. Look at that. It even knows to use posthog. So here we have a use effect that on full name changing will fire a full name changed event to our analytics. And all of this is successfully encapsulated in this use name thing. If we wanted to add this functionality over here, we have to make a whole separate thing, which is component should update. And in here, we get like the old and the new state. And then in here, we can do this manual diff ourselves, but we don't even have these defined. So we have to go define the state for this ourselves. We haven't defined a type for it, so we have to do all of that ourselves. None of this is inferred or logical. You have to write 100 times more type definitions, and if they ever change, you're fucked, just to hopefully know if this component should or shouldn't update. By the way, it always should update, so we're going to return true here. We're going to say const is name diff equals this chaotic thing. If is name diff, then we can fire the posthog capture event, which, by the way, if this is blocking, this will block the component render. This sucks. This sucks so hard. And this is how basically every other framework worked before React, and it's how half of them still work to this day. Your concerns, the flow of updating the name, setting the changes, triggering an update, and then showing you the result, this all sucked to do before hooks, like really badly. And is this simpler solution bad if you write it the old way? Sure. If you use new tools like their old tools, you'll always have problems. I'm already seeing in chat people fully agreeing. Component should update always felt so janky, like a band-aid fix for misproper state and props management. Yep. And now these things are so much easier to do. Look at how simple this code is. Even if you don't know what use effect is, the first time you look it up, you'll see, oh, when this changes, this runs. Okay, that makes sense. But the fact that I could define all of this behavior without writing any React component code, and now I can just call this in a component and everything works as expected, that's a really good thing. It's a really good thing. And while it does mean people who don't know how any of this works are going to write bad code, they would have written bad code anyways. Let's go through the other hooks he has issues with, because I'm curious. Use memo and use callback. These are often misused, either by not being used at all, leading to performance problems, or by being overused, leading to, ironically, poorer performance. For example, not seldom do I see developers think there's a difference between use callback, like this, and button on event equals this, when in reality, both allocate new functions every time the render process runs. The difference is that with use callback, React discards the function if the dependencies haven't changed, but there's still a function call internally by React. Thus, it's more expensive, which I know is rather negligible in most situations, but the point is that when trying to optimize, a dev ended up with worse results had they not done anything. Yeah, the new React compiler will absolutely help here. I don't agree the damage is done already. I think the React compiler actually helps a lot here. But this is like these are all issues that, okay, other than use effect, I'll admit use effect, I at this point would add a lint rule to my code bases that only lets you use a use effect in a custom hook. Use effect in components is almost always being used wrong. Use effect in a custom hook with a named specific purpose can be really useful. If you're not already familiar deeply with React, if you haven't read through the entirety of React.dev, like if you haven't read these docs, you should not be writing use effects. And I think that's fair. I understand why people get scared because they read some React code, they just copy paste it, not knowing it. So yeah, use effect should be in a custom hook, and you should know what the fuck you're doing if you're using use effect. Use states is phenomenal. And the reason people have issues with use state is they somehow think React works the way OO things do when they don't. So this is OO brain rot is what the use state problem is. And then use memo and use callback brain rot is premature optimization. So the first thing, I agree, we need better practice around this, but people shouldn't use this without experience. The second thing, OO brain rot. Third thing, premature optimization brain rot. Look at the last one, use ref. Although to a lesser extent, I've also seen widespread misuse of use ref, with developers using it to hold values that should be in state or props, leading to hard to follow code. Again, OO brain rot. People assume they can't define a variable in a component. And because of that, they throw them wherever else. If you're used to things that require you to bind every useful value inside of some crazy shit, like a this dot handle first, if you see React use state or use ref as the same as doing this, you fundamentally misunderstand both class components and use ref. And I agree, there's a lot of people who don't understand either of these things, but that's not a failure in the framework. The framework's actually doing this simpler than it's ever been done. So that's my issue with those things so far. Let's see the summary. Oh, that's actually really funny he brought this here. In summary, I find it hard to believe that moving away from methods like component will receive props, component did update, etc. to hooks was truly beneficial. Repeating myself, some AngularJS apps in the past had better separation of concerns than most React apps I encounter. Oh boy, we have the disagreement. We found it. Ding, ding, ding. I have just flipped my tone and I no longer like this author. I don't think the appeal to separation of concerns is ever meaningful at all. If your argument for why something is bad is the use of the term separation of concerns, that's like saying this is the clean code argument. If you say code is bad because it's not clean and you can't actually explain why, I don't care what you have to say. And it sucks. I was actually vibing with this until this moment, and I'm going to do my best to not let this bias me throughout the rest. But separation of concerns is such a fucking misused term that it disgusts me. I've tried my best to stop using it because of how badly misused it is. It's absolute bullshit. Any real code doesn't separate concerns, because as soon as you start separating the concerns, you have less control over them. Separated concerns make your code reviews worse, make your feature ship slower, make debugging things way harder, and make your code base miserable to work with. They're like unit tests, but only the negative parts. It's a bullshit argument for bullshit architecture. Yeah, this is a fair point, Samir. This like has to be an age thing. Like the only way you can sincerely make the argument for separation of concerns in a front-end library, by the way. Like this isn't the separation between back-end and front-end. We can talk about that all day. We all have different opinions. That's fine. This is the separation of your components, your state, and your UI. It makes no sense to separate those things. Let's go back to the example we have here. Even if I delete this use effect, hell, even if I delete the rest here and just put this in here in line the way it was before, does anybody sincerely think this is worse than this? How can you possibly believe that? And I know they said, well, that the to-do examples don't exist. Guess what? If you can have exponentially less complexity and you have any process to push for the less complexity, then you're going to have less complex apps. And if your app has to be complex because you're doing real things, the thing that guarantees a minimum level of complexity for every element in your application is going to have more complexity. Hooks were not controversial, and they still really aren't. It's weird to see an argument against React that's against hooks, because there's a reason they took over in popularity. Like, hooks just won. Server components might not win. I'm realistic about that. I love them. I think they're great. But I understand that server components, due to the separation of concerns of running React on the back end and all those things, have people reasonably concerned. Nobody thinks class components are better. This is bad. This is just worse. This is, and like component should update is such a cursed thing. And again, it's weird that I'm going to keep pulling up the Vue docs, but this describes it perfectly. One of these things is separation of concerns. The other one is readable code. One of these things is really fun to write when you don't know what you're doing. The other one is actually reviewable in pull requests. I just cannot believe like the issue with this isn't just it's harder to read here. The issue is that in code review, you have to now look at so many different things changing to figure out what's actually going on. Like if we wanted to add full name here, how do we do it? Where does it go? How many places do I have to assign it? If we want to add another variable here, how many places do I have to go? How many subcomponents do I have to pass weird things to and then super them in the props and get them to the right place? It's so awful. It's actually funny that the initial point was React's great for, what was it, to-do lists? Yeah. If you're just making a to-do list, sure, it's all fun and games. Yeah, but as soon as your components do two things, not one, the mess that is class components and patterns like it immediately falls apart. There's a reason this doesn't work, and a reason we as an ecosystem moved off it, and a reason that we have all these awesome hooks and awesome new patterns that are being built by better devs to make React easier. I would also wonder how many of the problems that you're describing here, especially with like use state being misused and use effect especially, could have been solved just by using React Query. Tanstat query, React Query, whatever you want to call it, makes it so easy to just call something and have it and have good behaviors. And you can't do this in other frameworks anywhere near as easily because other frameworks don't have a state model that can inject this trivially into your component body. Because React doesn't have component level behaviors anymore, they have hook level behaviors and the state works around the state instead of working around the components. The issue here is that you have to deeply understand how class components work before you can do anything, because every change you make has to hook into every single one of these parts. And if you don't understand the difference between should component update and component did update, your code's going to break terribly. And if you change should component update to do something different than some other person did before, you might add a massive performance issue to your application, which is hilariously common. Hooks won for a reason. It's the composability, the simplicity, the scalability. So many hooks are just better. And it's crazy to think someone would argue against that. It makes it harder for me to read the rest of this in good faith. Everything is crammed into the render. Okay, I think I found the problem. This author is trying to think about React in terms of the component lifecycle instead of the lifecycle of the things the component is doing. If I go back to the example I made before where I broke this out into a custom hook, function use name, it's not what I wanted to do. We'll paste that. Don't need this. This is the magic of hooks. I know I showed this before, but I really want to emphasize this point. You don't need to have all of the behaviors in your component because these behaviors aren't specific to my component. These behaviors are specific to the state and when the state changes and the things I want to do when the state changes. You can have all of your stateful stuff exist outside of the component and then hook them in. But that's the magic of hooks. It's not that you're dumping all the weird things you used to do in your components into hooks. The magic is that your state can be separate from your hooks. Same with server components, where your DOM structure and your data flows can also be separate from your components. You can fetch data in the component and then pass it somewhere else, but the component shouldn't have all of these things we have to hook into, because this is still hooks, but for every piece of state, we have to hook like 5 things. We have to hook handle first name, we have to hook handle last name, we have to bind both of these with this. We then in render have to dump them from this .state. By the way, we also have to define them in this .state, which we didn't do, so that's broken now. We have full name, which we have to define here. And now if we make changes, we have to make sure this is persisted. All of these things are only possible because React forced you to do them. React, by having these lifecycle hooks, made you force all of your state into the exact shape of a React component. And if you had state that didn't fit this well, or you had state you wanted to use in 3 places, you're kind of just fucked. And we invented so many patterns to fix this. Who remembers the good old days of render props? Render props are in the legacy docs telling you don't use these anymore. The way render props worked is if we had data that we wanted access to in a component, we would write a custom component, like a data provider, that had a custom render function that it would trigger once it got the data, and then it would trigger with that data so that you could render an inline component here. This is how we handled hooks before. This is the stuff that we had to do to make these patterns work, because if every single component had to have 15 different component bindings just to get some data from GraphQL, it just doesn't fucking work. This pattern sucked. And everybody's saying in chat, don't bring up the bad memories. Oh, fuck, render props and prop validation. Yeah, this is horrible. It was not good. And there's a reason that hooks were made, because they saw all these things we were doing and realized, oh, we should fix that. If you really want separation of concerns, do what I did here. Take the concern, which is use name, and separate it into a custom hook, name to use name. You could separate your concerns how you choose to. And if you have a decent code reviewer pointing these things out, or lint rules enforcing them, it becomes very easy. There are a few lint rules you could add that would probably solve all your problems. Lint rule 1, never allow more than 2 hooks in a component. If you need more, make a custom hook. Rule 2, never allow use effects in a component. Now every use effect has a name for what it's doing. That's the biggest issue I've seen with use effect, is you don't actually say what it's doing, you just do some shit. But if your use effect exists in a custom hook, at least the custom hook has a name, so it's a little clearer as to what your goal was there. Careful saying concerns too loudly. Rails nearly imploded over that. Yep. Does it suck that you need an engineer like me to make your React code base good? Kind of. But that's why we have so many awesome resources about this. And I'm going to drop one of my spiciest takes. I know a couple of you watching right now are junior engineers. I know that because I've talked to a bunch of you. I know that this type of stuff seems way out of your league, that you're just the new guy on the team. There's no way they're going to listen to you as you push back on these things. You're in a code base where everything's falling apart, and you see it happening, and it's breaking your heart to see people using React hooks the same way they think class components should have worked. Just because you're a newer developer, just because you're newer on the team, doesn't mean you can't be the advocate. I was still a junior engineer at Twitch when I pushed Twitch towards hooks. I got promoted a bunch afterwards, but I was able to have this impact, not because I'm some super senior engineer with all this experience, because I was excited about it early. And since I was excited, since I watched all the ways these were being used, since I learned what did and didn't work, made mistakes, and pushed to figure these things out, I became the hooks guy, even though I was a junior engineer at the time. If you're here, if you're watching these videos and the things I'm saying resonate with you, I don't care what your fucking title is. You can have this impact at your job. Start bringing these things up in code reviews. Do a ton of code reviews. If you're the type of person watching the stuff here, dealing with the problems that I just showed here, you should be spending twice as much time doing code reviews as you're spending writing code, because you can guide the whole company in the right direction. In the worst cases, they push back, and now you have a great story to tell when you interview somewhere better. So seriously, take advantage of the opportunity that's been gracefully given to us by these terrible code bases. If you care enough to watch this video, you care enough to fix this shit. And it's a great opportunity to grow yourself, grow your impact, be remembered well, and expand the number of opportunities you have exponentially. You don't need to be a great experienced engineer to make better React code out of a shit React code base, but you need to be willing to do it. And if you're willing to do it, you can do some awesome shit. Thank you, Elias, for this comment. It's actually really good. I consider myself a junior React dev, but I'm senior into tech lead. So I'm the exact opposite. I'm not afraid to learn from people who know better. The number of super talented engineers, like even when I was at ReactConf recently, I was talking to the guy who taught me React, who built the code base and the documentation, everything I needed to start learning it. And I still look up to him immensely. He told me he just didn't get server components and use server just didn't work for him. And after talking for a little bit and he watched one of my videos, he realized, oh, use server is not for server components, use servers for server actions. And that was the like, oh shit moment for me of like, wow, just because he knows React way better than me, just because he knows web dev as a whole better than me, doesn't mean my knowledge of these new things isn't better and potentially useful to him. It was cool to see a dev that experienced who runs the core React code base at Twitch, able to humble themselves by watching somebody he trained in React explaining these new things to him. Great developers will take these opportunities. And if the people you're working with don't take them, they're not great developers. And that's a great thing to know if you are. So push for these things to be better so that poor already said poor Mundo here doesn't have to come in later to fix all the damage. If you can catch these things early, if you can leave code review saying, hey, would it be better if we bumped this out and put it in a custom hook so we can at least have a name for what it's doing? Those little pieces of feedback build up really quickly, and then those developers make those recommendations to other people in the future too. I want to keep reading about this because we're getting into Redux. This is going to trigger me. I can already tell. I've dealt with some nasty Redux shit, and I know I'm going to get mad. So early warning. With Redux being considered bad in recent years, okay, Redux, not terrible. Redux Toolkit, quite good. Redux Saga, horrifying. And I already see this here. Many things that would at least be in separate Thunk and Saga files are now in the render body too. Do you know how awful Thunk and Saga files were? I cannot imagine anyone sincerely defending Saga. It suggests that the code bases he used to work in were newer and smaller, and these ones are bigger and older. I recall that back then, React was initially said to be just the V part of the MVC framework, perhaps even by the official team itself. But this has been long forgotten with everything commingled in one place. React never said that. React said that MVC was a bad abstraction, and we should be focused on making the things that actually matter to our UI much closer tied. The promise was never, we're the V, bring your own model and controller. The promise was MVC might not be the right way to break things up. What if your view could do everything and now you can abstract as you please? And then they realized that having all the state stuff baked in deeply to their components, like it was here, where everything a state could do, everything first name can do, has to be baked into the component through an updater function like this, through should component update, will component update, all of those things. Every additional piece of state needs to touch all of the parts of the component. They realized that doesn't work for their goal of letting you write the simplest possible thing to describe the behavior you're trying to write. And then Svelte happened and even further proved that this was the wrong way, which is why hooks are such a valuable thing. I will say Svelte does this as well, and is a big part of why I like Svelte so much. But even then, they caught onto these similar issues where instead of having hooks, they changed what equal means. In order to fix that, they invented runes, which are basically just hooks inside of Svelte. So the same way all things either die out or become a crab, all good UI libraries either die out or become hooks. So there's a reason we've, as a community, coalesced on this pattern. It is so much easier to write and scale because MVC is an arbitrary abstraction that doesn't work great for so many things. Yeah. So you can make MVC if you want to in React. as I said before, totally fine if you want to do that, if you like that abstraction. But again, this is the benefit and the negative of the React open model is any 3 React code bases could be entirely different. But ideally, you're writing things in the simplest way, and then you're making them more complex as you need to, rather than copy pasting existing complexity. This is part of what makes React so magical is the right solution is usually the simplest one. And if it's not, they try to fix that over time. Like with the stuff we touched on here with use memo and use callback, these are absolutely misused. And the fact that these are so complex to work with properly is a problem. That's why they made React Compiler, not to unfuck old code, but to let the simplest React code be the right React code. And that's the goal. That's always been the goal of React. How can we make the simplest code also correct? And they've done a great job at that. And there's so many other benefits that aren't being acknowledged here. Like again, it's a big code review benefit, but the fact that all the things this component does are in the component or can be command clicked to the place that they came from, that just makes code review way simpler. The fact that you can write top to bottom exactly what the component is doing, not behaviors the component calls, but the things the component does, top to bottom, makes everything easier. And thinking otherwise is just not doing code review. I do find that these takes tend to come more from people who come from backgrounds where they're rewriting code more than they're reviewing code. Code reviewers and code rewriters have very different perspectives and very different opinions. I find that very few code reviewers hate React. Code rewriters do because they're being handed shit code. Code reviewers are handed a much wider palette of different types of code, so they have a much different perspective. And I, to this day, do a lot more code reviewing than code writing. That's a huge part of why I liked React. That's why I got into it initially, is when I saw the diffs, when I saw people were writing in the new React code base at Twitch, it was exciting because it made sense. And then when hooks happened, it made even more sense. Yeah, I want to rant more about the MVC and the thunk thing here. He brought up server components, so I have to talk about this. And with the introduction of server components, the database calls and whatnot are also in the render, which means things will surely become even more cluttered. So his push here is that everything in render is bad. Let me push an alternative. If we go back here, having components that have all of these specific things related to how a component works, that every value has to be passed through at every step, and having the data not control the behavior, having the component control the behavior, and the data just has to be stuffed in the right spots. That is significantly worse. Having to use component did update, component should update, component will mount, component will unmount for every piece of data in a given component is significantly worse than doing it in render. The reason that the render function mattered is because the component owned the world. The component was the lifecycle. The component had the shelves in it that your state had to be stuffed into. With hooks, the HTML, JSX, whatever you want to consider it, output of a component is just the thing that gets resulted at the end now. It's not one of the many built-in functions a component has to have. It's not one of those built-in shelves you have to stuff things into. It's the result. And if you stop thinking of render as this one function in your class and start thinking of render as the return, because that's what I think of when I think of render. It's the thing that's being returned from the component, not the specific binding in this object. Now, when you think of it that way, you realize, oh, the state is what controls the lifecycle, not the component. I'm not stuffing state into the component. I'm rendering a component out of the state. And when you flip that model, data in, component out, instead of component in, data stuffed in component, render out, render reruns, should update happens, all that shit. Instead, it's just you read the code, you see what's returned, and you're good. That did not exist before. And it makes life so much easier. It's insane. I want to read more of what he has to say because this keeps going and there's a bit more. Yeah, I'm not even going to touch on the server component part because, yeah. Large component files with excessive composability. Sometimes I browse a page in my app and then I go to the code and I have to go 3 to 5 component levels up to find the actual definition of a prop, like a handle event callback due to prop drilling. Yeah. This can happen. This was copied from somebody else's. So you parent with props and then multiple things being passed down this way. I just don't find this happening too often, but when it does, I actually find prop drilling to be pretty nice because it makes a very explicit relationship for what each component expects. Let's say some props is needed in something. If some props has key user information and I need that in something, what if I go remount something somewhere else? Prop drilling is great because I can pass something, the value, and something can now, as a component, say, I need this value or you cannot render me. That ability to isolate a component. If you want to talk about separation of concerns, Isn't it great to be able to separate our components? If you're going to use the term separation of concerns, you need to at least acknowledge the fact that the browser has elements, and those should probably be separated. If you're using other frameworks, especially older ones like jQuery, the separation is HTML, JS, and CSS. There's no separation between your buttons. There's just buttons and then JavaScript that binds to them. Separation of concerns doesn't just mean different arbitrary technology pieces. It also means the things that you're concerned about in your app. Different components have different needs. You should be able to separate them. I know people keep saying prop drilling versus context now, and you can pass things with context. Yes, cool, awesome. I find that for things like this where prop drilling would have worked, context is often not the best call because context won't work if you mount something outside. Context is really good for specific things, but I try to not recommend it because if you need context, you'll usually know, but you don't always. Also a good point from Alchemist. Sometimes separation of concern means separation of the people in the team. Yes, absolutely. Last I checked, I don't have a model team, a viewing team, and a controller team. I have a chat team. I have a safety team. I have a design team building things that all of these teams use. I have a blog and media team that does the marketing tools. I have a player team that manages the player component. Like at Twitch, there's a team of 20 people that make one component, the player. And if I have to integrate the player and all these other things in a chaotic way, you just made that team's life significantly harder because of separation of concerns meaning something that it doesn't actually mean to you. It's absurdity. So don't like those arguments at all. But as for the prop drilling thing, like if you're wrapping your components this aggressively, at the very least, pass these things down as children sometimes. So let's say we actually have this code. I'm going to throw this in here, and it's going to get really mad because I have TypeScript, so it's actually going to be type safe. Function weird nesting example. So if I have this in here, const sum props equals, cool. So if parent has some props, how do I get that down to something? Well, if I'm rendering this here, it's pretty easy. Now something has some props. But that's not what they meant with this example. What they meant was that parent is here, and this has props, some props, any. It's going to be mad at me for the any, so we'll say it's a string. And I'm going to kill parent because we don't have that anymore. If this is the tree that we're returning, cool. Now parent can pass props.someprops directly here. But what if it's not? What if these are being rendered by other things? Well, that's pretty easy too. You take the things that it's rendering. So if we have thing and this renders sub thing, we can make this JSX too. And as long as the child that you're trying to pass these props to exists at the same level as where the props came from, you can just pass JSX down. Obviously here, the right pattern would be children, which is funny because the example he gave here was meant to be other thing returns small thing returns even smaller thing returns tiny thing returns really tiny thing. But if these just took children instead, and you just pass the child, the problem goes away entirely. This is like basic composition rules. This is not knowing how functions work. I can see going to like 4 levels max, like max. Yep. It's just insanity. Like if you're writing this in a way where each of these components is a nested layer, but this is the one with the useful data, and this is the one that needs the data, that means everything between these 2 points is useless. This should just be one component then. There is basically no instance in which this level of prop drilling makes sense unless you are using React to abstract every single little thing as a component. And it's funny because he also complained above about large component files with excessive composability. Large component files solve this problem. If all of this stuff was done in one component, you wouldn't have a prop drilling problem. Large components and prop drilling are opposite problems. These are 2 different extremes. Both are bad, but they're 2 different extremes. And if you live a reasonable life in the middle, you'll have a great time. But yes, if you overuse any pattern in anything, it'll probably be bad. Apparently, they don't like JSX now. Developers move business logic to the render with loops and ternaries, even worse if nested everywhere, making it hard to follow if all you want to see is the HTML template structure of a component. I'm not even going to engage with that one. I like the first half of this too. I'm sad this is falling apart so fast. Okay, dozens of React contexts, sure. But how many of these contexts are a thing you wrote or that your team wrote versus a thing you're getting from somewhere else? Like most of the contexts I'm mounting are like my analytics provider, my auth provider, my error management provider, not things like the user state or which page we're on type stuff. So sure, this isn't great, but if you're shoving everything into context, it's again, you're like brute forcing globals into a framework that's anti-globals. So sure, if you are insisting that globals are a necessary pattern and you're nesting 15 of them at the top of your app, yeah, I agree. You're a shitty developer. You're remaking MobX at that point. How can this possibly be better than a single global store? It's not. The problem here is that you try to force a global store into a framework that doesn't have a global store. If you're misusing context as a pattern that you're used to from somewhere else, it is bad. Yes. This is the recurring theme, is you have a problem that exists because you are thinking in a way that is different, because you used other tools that work in an old way. And obviously that's not going to apply to this different way of thinking. The best I can steel man what's happening here is that most devs aren't good devs. Most devs have experience with other things. So React being the default is bad because most devs adopting React are going to be used to things that work differently. That's the only way I can good faith interpret this, is the nature of how bad most developers are and the fact that their experience is with things that work differently, worse but different from React, means that people are going to force patterns that aren't very React-y into React and then have a bad time. But even then, most of these weren't that bad. Like if we go through this list one last time before I read the conclusion, let's see the problems that he's found. The first one was use effect, which I agree, but you can Command F across the code base, find all the use effects, annotate them, export them, delete them, whatever. And then with one pass and like one message to the front end team saying, hey, read this page, we're using use effect wrong. Okay, that problem's gone. That was a real problem, but it's gone now. Use state. This was a really basic misunderstanding of how values work. Not even like OO versus FP or whatever. This is just not understanding how assignment works fundamentally. Learn what closures are. It will help you. Use memo and use callback. This one's largely been fixed by React compiler. Was it over adopted? Sure. Solve problem. Use ref. If you don't know what you're doing, don't use ref. Like if you don't have a very specific thing that you know use ref well enough to use it, you probably shouldn't use it. The number of use refs, I'm going to do the thing that I always stress out my CTO when I do it. We're going to open up the upload thing code base. The upload thing code base is not small. This is for the web app, by the way. We have a single use ref in here for assigning the image element so that when you click it, we can trigger an input. But that's the only instance of a use ref in our entire code base. You don't need it. And I agree, use effect isn't intuitive, but on one hand, it's a hard thing to make intuitive, but they could have made some changes that make it more intuitive. But on the other hand, they didn't want it to be intuitive because they don't want you using it. You probably shouldn't be using use effect. If you're not sure how to use use effect, you probably don't need it. So we went through the hooks. The use effect one, kind of a fair point. Audit them, be stricter about them. Use state is bullshit. Use memo, use callback is solved. Use ref is bullshit. Going back down here, large components are good and counteract the prop drilling problem that you discussed here. So this is two opposite extremes. Solve problem. JSX is so good that everyone's moving to it. Even Astra, which is largely positioned as like the anti-React, but React compatible thing, they wrote their own like markup solution, realized how miserable it was to maintain, realized JSX was better, and they moved JSX. JSX won. It's like over. It's actually one of the things that has made it hardest for me to leave React and Solid is that JSX is so good. It is just JavaScript, which is magical. Yeah, even backend folks are trying to mimic the syntax now. Also, the dozens of React contexts. Yeah, if you force a global into a thing that's not a global, it's going to be bad. Yeah, cool. So we went through all of the things. Most of them are skill issue. Not even big skill issues, but small skill issues that are solvable, usually with basic lint rules. These aren't why React codebases get messy. React codebases get messy because you wrap things 15 times you don't need to. You have an old class component that everybody's scared to touch because it does 100 things. Like I remember there was a class component for chat at Twitch that was like 2,000 something lines, and it had so many intermingled. Again, I'm going to keep pulling up this composition thing from the Vue docs. It was this, but 1,000 lines plus of just weird state bindings, and another 500 plus lines of random returns, and another 500 plus lines of unnecessary like this dot bindings getting it all orchestrated. This mess of your concerns all intermingling because they all have to be shoved into your component in different places. This was the everyday experience in AngularJS, in Vue, in React. And hooks proved it didn't have to be. Hooks gave us this, where each concern can be its own chunk in the code, and then the return is what happens when it's all done. That is a significantly simpler model. But if you're stuck with old things like this and new things like the thing on the right, that could be kind of not great. I could go on, but I'll stop to not make this post even longer. I'm really curious to hear other experienced engineers' perspectives and general takes on this. Being honest, I seriously believe, or at least hope, that React won't be the end game for web dev. Either one of the existing alternatives, Vue, Svelte, Solid, Quick, etc., or a new one should emerge and fix this muddle. At this stage, I think it's impossible for React itself to do this, unless they release something as significant as the shift from AngularJS to Angular 2, but then we might as well not call it React anymore, just as it happened with Angular. Almost all of these problems exist in all of these frameworks. The only thing here that doesn't is use effect. The rest all does. Yeah, I'm confused. I want to read the comments. I'm curious. This is actually an interesting counter perspective here. My main struggle with it isn't that it's difficult or anything, or that you can't develop some standards around organizing your components. It's the fact that every time you do get some stability in that area, my team will see a new trick or a new plugin or tool has become available and insist that we have to refactor literally everything to use that thing. Then it becomes an even more bug-ridden mess because edge cases and previous bug fixes get lost, and the new tool is nicer to use, but only covers 75% of the functionality to the thing we're replacing. And ultimately, the collective online dev mind will shift to another shiny new toy in 3 months. We'll be back to square one with strands of all these new tools and frameworks all over the place. Half agree. I think the modular nature of React makes it easier to adopt things, but isn't the issue here that everybody's mad about React code bases from 2016? It sounds like, as JKFSDA just said, that React is pretty mature. You can use old React code. All of us we're not using new frameworks all over the app. We're still using React, still compatible with all the old stuff. You can move to a new trick or plugin or tool, and the old code still works. You don't have to delete it. I agree that we have a lot more shiny object syndrome in React because we can make better solutions, but you can keep using the old solution. You can keep using the old thing. No one's forcing you to use the new thing. If you don't like the new thing, that's fine. And if you're the tech lead making these decisions, maybe insist that these new tools or technologies are isolated to specific, like smaller code bases or parts of the app until they've been proven out. But this is just basic engineering culture shit. The fact that there are potential ways to improve your code base being developed by the community isn't a bad thing unless your culture means they're going to adopt all of those things. The fact that we're constantly finding new ways to improve stuff is great because it means your ancient old code base written in React of 2016 can have sections of it that are really modern and nice to work with, and you can slowly move over to those new patterns. These are strengths of React. But if you let every dev add every tool they find vaguely interesting without justifying it, you're going to have a mess, like you would in any other code base. Also here, yeah, they're a pain in the ass to update. I get it. This is talking about jQuery, to be clear. Yeah. If you have a React code base where nothing is changing, it's going to keep working. If you have an old jQuery code base that nothing's changed and it keeps working, the reason the old jQuery code bases are associated with being more stable is because nobody wants to touch them because they're so fragile, they'll break if you change anything. But with the React code bases, the separation of concerns being at a component level means that when you change something in a component, the effects of that are isolated to that component. That's part of the magic of React, is you can have these junior engineers contributing small components to your code base, making small changes, and the likelihood they break the entire app is exponentially lower than any tool or technology that existed before it. Stability in a code base is underrated. I agree. If your team owns 3 projects and they have slightly different depths because they were created at different times, I can't understand how developer brains seem to implode at the idea of context switching between sagas or RTK middleware as an example. If you're that lost with switching from one to another, it's you and not the tool that's the problem. Yeah, I agree with this fully. I like this a lot. If you have one code base that's using old things and one code base that's using new things, you don't have to move the old code base to the new thing. This is a great point. And this feels like it contradicts what he said above here. I just don't get why you would say this is a React problem when you just stated the solution that only React is capable of. The other cool thing that's not being touched on here is you can have those 3 different code bases, these 3 different projects at your company that are all on different versions of React using different libraries for their state and all these other things. But if you have a component library that your design team made in React, that can be used in all of those code bases. You can use that component library in the class component-based React 16 project, in the deep on Saga's React code base from a couple of years ago, and it's something using server components, all this fancy new shit right now. You can share a lot of this logic, these primitives, these pieces across things, intercompose, intermingle, and just do shit no other framework before React even thought of. And like module federation. Module federation is a thing that React largely enabled, which is so cool. And this is why I get frustrated when I read these points, is so many of them just feel like contradictions. Yeah. Welcome to business programming. It ain't pretty, but it pays the bills. Yep. This is not a React-specific thing. Most code bases are messy and get more messy over time. I used to work in large front-end code bases that utilize jQuery and Java server pages. Still gives me nightmares. Yep. Our code base has been around for 6-ish years. The engineers know what they're doing. Pretty great place to work. Yep. Here's a good one. The fundamental problem is that most developers can't evolve past localized imperative thinking and thus cannot reason properly about state, leading to the problems that you've described. To break this down into slightly more understandable things, the way things change, people don't expect to understand. They expect it to be told to them. And with the class component model, the way things updated and when they updated was all defined in the code directly. But with hooks, it's defined around the data indirectly. So you choose what updates happen rather than the component is updating and you choose when to opt out. Instead, you're opting in, but you have to understand enough to do that. And that is great because it means your code can be significantly simpler, but it's bad if you don't know what you're doing because there aren't 3 shelves in each component telling you stuff these here, stuff these here, stuff these here. It's way more composable, but if you haven't evolved past the idea that the component is state, you're fucked. And as they say, this problem is not specific to React, but a problem for larger applications in general. My focus as a lead of a 200+ contributor app is to contain the bad patterns and ensure the horizontal concerns are built correctly, as there will always be weaker teams. Yep, A++. This was quite the journey. I knew diving into this was going to be fun. I did not expect it to be this long a video. Let me know what resonated with you the most and the least in the comments. And until next time, peace.